Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back once again to our ongoing series on the glories of our most beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Thank you for being with us. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pastracha Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we are continuing with our mini-series on stimulation for ecstatic love, and this will be part 39. For this lecture, I have chosen a very interesting subject, betel leaf in Krishna's Vrindavan pastimes. The reason I chose this subject is that I often come across the mention of betel leaf or betel nut in researching for my lectures. For example, Srimad Bhagavatam 10:12:1 describes one of the days that Krishna ate lunch with his cowherd friends in the Vrindavan forest. The verse says, "O king, one day Krishna decided to take his breakfast as a picnic in the forest. Having risen early in the morning, he blew his bugle made of horn and woke all the cowherd boys and cows with its beautiful sound. Then Krishna and the boys, keeping their respective groups of calves before them, proceeded from Vajrabhumi to the forest." Then in Brihad Bhagavatamritam 3:7 verses 60 and 61, Srila Sanatana Goswami reveals some of the food that Krishna ate. He writes, "That most expert enjoyer of all kinds of amusing sports drank a savory tamarind nectar, many other beverages, and buttermilk and Yamuna water, carried in tumbi gourds and other sorts of vessels, and he made the boys drink too. In this way, he delighted all the cowherd boys." Then, in verse 62, this is really interesting, Sanatana Goswami writes, "Then Krishna did ajman, and then chewed fragrant, camphor-rich betel nut that each boy had brought from his home, and also fresh forest betel nut, soaked and wrapped in many leaves of naga creepers. He enjoyed the betel nut and also gave it out." So therein we hear how Krishna and his friends relished this betel nut. And in Padyavali, verse 188, Srila Rupa Goswami, Prabhupada, reveals how Srimati Radharani also enjoys this betel nut. He writes, "O Krishna, O killer of the Mura demon, your absence has so stunned beautiful-faced Radharani that as she talks at night with her friends, she cannot remember whether she took any betel nuts, whether the betel nuts are in her hand, or whether the betel nuts are in her mouth." And just this morning, I was reading how Srila Narottam Das Thakur hankers for the seva, or the service, of offering betel in the form of tambula to the divine couple together. In his book Prarthana, he writes in the poem Radha Krishna Pranamora, "Gatiya malatir mala dibodo hara gale adhare tuliya dibo karpura tambule." After stringing together garlands of malati flowers, I will place them around their necks, and I will offer tambula, scented with camphor to the lotus mouths. Scented with camphor to the lotus mouths. So now, tambula is made with betel leaves and contains betel nuts and other pleasantries. In other words, they make a kind of a cup, you could say, out of betel leaves, and inside they put betel nut and other pleasantries. We'll discuss that a little bit later. I'll describe tambula more in detail. Now, the service of offering betel leaf to the divine couple is actually the principal seva of Lalita Devi, one of the Astasakis, Lalita Saki, one of the 8 principal maidservants of Radharani. She performs numerous services to please their lordships, but offering betel leaf is one of her favorites. During the rasa dance with Krishna, she stands on the right side of Krishna, holding a golden box of betel leaves and spices to offer to Radha and Krishna during the dance. In our Krishna Balaram Mandir, our temple in Vrindavan, we see there on the altar Lalita's in that pose with a silver box meant to contain the same items. She and Lalita and Vishaka are on either side of Radha and Krishna. She's holding a silver box with betel leaves, Lalita. And actually, Lalita Saki has her own garden where she grows betel leaf. This is revealed by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Radha Krishna Gunadesha Dipika, verses 134 and 136. He writes, Madan Madini Vatyam Ka Kinara Kishora Ka Prashuna Vali Tambula Vali Puga Tume Sucha. Sri Lalita is the supervisor of the maidservants who perform Tambula Seva. She is the supervisor of the Kinara Kishoris engaged in the Madan Madini garden. She is the supervisor of the maidservants who protect flower vines, betel leaves, as well as betel nut trees. She's the supervisor of the Vana Devis, the flower goddesses, and even those maidens who are esteemed in venerable groups. I really like that last line. So poetic. And even those maidens who are esteemed in venerable groups. So Lalita Saki. So Lalita engages all these different types of maidservants in the service of producing and offering betel leaf. And she herself is expert in Tambul Vidya. Tambul Vidya, or rather the skill of making betel. Tambul refers to the betel leaf, and Vidya refers to the science or knowledge of how to make them into beautiful forms to offer Radha and Krishna. Now, while making betel for the divine couple, Lalita Saki utters a special mantra while binding these betels. In my research, I found that she actually got this mantra from the goddess of the forest known as Vanadevi. And this mantra works to increase the love of Radha and Krishna. So when she's binding these betel leaves, she chants this mantra, and this mantra, which is imbued into the betel leaves, increases the love of Radha and Krishna when they partake it. In this regard, it is said that Lalita Saki has two unique qualities. Number one, the strong or sometimes harsh words coming from her lotus mouth, and number two, her skillfully made betels. By strong words, or harsh words, she separates the divine couple and brings forth Sri Radha's pride, like Manavati. And afterwards, by offering Radha and Krishna her handmade betels, she reunites them with love and devotion. So I can explain this a little more in detail. We've discussed on several occasions that, Lalita has a very fiery nature. We discussed that 2 years ago, I think, a whole class on her. In that, when she sees Krishna teasing Sri Radha, she speaks strongly, causing him to go away, or she goes away with Radha. Rupa Goswami writes in his Lalita Ashtakam, verse 5, he writes, I offer respects unto the abode of all good qualities, the supremely charming Sri Lalita Devi, who, upon hearing Sri Krishna speak even a few sly words to Srimati Radharani, immediately becomes furious and shames Krishna with her biting, sarcastic remarks. O Krishna, you are so truthful and simple-hearted and such a chaste lover. So then Krishna goes away. But later, by offering both of them, Radha and Krishna, her specially charmed betel, she reignites their love for each other, and they reunite. These are the two sevas she does. Separates them and brings them back together. Vaishnava scholars call this Chambaka Krida, or kumbhaka kantakrita, which means essentially love acting like a magnet, in the sense that it can attract or repel. As we've all seen, a magnet can repel a piece of metal, or when you turn it around, attract a piece of metal. So Lalita Sakhi is an expert in separating the divine couple by her fiery words, and then reuniting them with her love-charmed betel leaf. So interesting how our acharyas dive deep into this Braj Bhakti. Srila Prabhupada actually refers to this special skill of Lalita Sakhi to revive Sri Radha when she's feeling separation from Krishna in Nectar of Devotion, in chapter 30. There he writes, one of the principal gopis, Lalita, informed Krishna, "My dear Krishna, when you disappeared from the arena of the rasa dance, our most dear friend Radharani immediately fell on the ground and lost consciousness. But after this, when I offered her some of your chewed betel nut remnants, she immediately returned to consciousness with jubilant symptoms in her body." Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Now earlier, we mentioned the silver box that Lalita Sakhi holds next to Krishna on the altar at our Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, or for that matter, any altar in the world where she and Vishakha Sakhi stand on either side of Radha and Krishna. I was reading that she has many different types of these boxes. Some are silver, some are golden, and some are embedded with gemstones, all of which store the betals to offer Radha and Krishna. Now, the betel leaves themselves can be of many different shapes and sizes, and how they're combined together to be placed in the hand of Radharani for offering to Krishna. One is a cone shape, and I was remembering that in older deities of Radharani that I've seen in Bengal and Orissa, we see in her left hand that she's holding flowers or giving blessings, but in her right hand she's offering betel to Krishna. Many older deities you see like that cone shaped in her hand. Sometimes pujaris place in Radharani's hand 2 cones of betels joined together, so she can offer Krishna. And they are known as Yugala Tambula. Yugala Tambula. Like sometimes we refer to Radha and Krishna as Yugala Kishore. So Yugala Tambula, when 2 cones are offered. Pujaris take note. In Sanskrit, it means a set of 2 betels. Yugala Tambula. And very often these betels are wrapped in gold foil, which make them look like a golden betel, and they are known as Kanaka Patra, or the golden leaf. Kanaka Patra, another way to offer betel. So now when betel leaves are offered to Krishna by Sri Radha or by a pujari, it's called tambula. Again, we're mentioning tambula, but actually traditionally tambula consists of betel nuts and 64 spices and flavors. The betel leaves again, and inside, betel nuts and 64 spices and flavors. That's tambula. But for the most part, the particular items that are placed inside are kept secret. They're kept secret. It's a secret. Only a few special souls know. Why? Because it's described, it's a luxury reserved for the Lord. It's one of the luxuries reserved for the Lord. So it's a little confidential. In Vrindavan lore, in connection to this subject of luxury, I was reading, in Vrindavan lore, it is said there are 7 different luxuries. I found this really interesting. What are the 7 luxuries? The luxury of having a guru, the luxury of having learned friends, the luxury of traveling in all the 4 directions, the luxury of experiencing 6 different tastes of food, the luxury of wearing silken garments, the luxury of witnessing a dream come true. Wow. The luxury of witnessing a dream come true. And number 7, the luxury of having betel leaf. It's said that these 7 types of luxuries are rare, even for the demigods to possess. But they are all available for Radha and Krishna's servants in Vrindavan, because, well, those servants use them, Amala Bhakti, fully for the pleasure of the Lord. So all luxuries are given to them, not for themselves, but for the pleasure of Radha and Krishna. Now, fortunately, although it's a secret, seek and ye shall find, I managed to find a list of half the 64 items. Couldn't find the others. Where did I find them? In a poem by a medieval poet named Vyasadas in Vrindavan Research Institute. He writes that, he says, true tambula contains the following items to be offered to Radha and Krishna, either in the cone form or the yugala tambula, the double cone. They include, we'll go down the list here. I found 32, half. Kevda, which means drops of screw pine flour. Katta, katechu. Chuna, lime. Lavang, clove. Lachi, cardamom. Pungifala, that's betel nut. Gulab, meaning rose petals. Shoshva, this is of fennel seeds. Shripala, meaning coconut powder. Mulaiti, licorice of sweet wood. Keshara, we all know keshara as saffron. Longji means dried raw mango. Mishri, jaggery. Harichuri, green pungent leaves. Motichuri, this is a nice one. Crushed white pearls. Wow, tambula contains crushed white pearls. Survarna patrika, that's fenugreek. Then chandana churna, it's powdered sandalwood. Dalchini, cinnamon. Kali michi is black pepper. Patra, thin gold foils. Then sugnadi is described as desired incense oil. Then number 22 is Yamuna chal, the bark of the Java plum tree. So if you're taking down the list here to offer tambula, so that Radharani can give it to Krishna, I don't know if you're going to find the bark of a Java plum tree. Jamuna chal, the bark of a Java plum tree. Then there's kadambari, it's a type of dried fruit. Bacha, it's another type of herb actually. Sharshti means white sugar. Tulsi bij is seeds of the tulsi plant. Haridra, this is a really interesting one. Haridra, a yellow edible rock. No comment. A yellow edible rock. Then there's Sudarshan Patra, it's the dried leaf of the Sudarshan tree. Giri is almonds. Number 30 is Rai Kali, it's a type of herb. Madhu, drops of honey. Then 32, what's 32? Neha, referring to love. The most important ingredient, probably. So that's tambula. For the other 32, I think we just have to wait till we get back to Goloka Vrindavan. And the secret will be revealed. And we can help Lalita Saki make tambula. So in Stabhavali, by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, in the section called Swashankalpa Prakasha Stotra, verse 10, Das Goswami describes his desire to offer such tambula, to offer such betel to the lotus mouth of the divine couple. He writes so beautifully, O friend, if she whose name bears the nectar syllables Ranga Devi, on my request, teaches me the art of dancing. Then in the rasa dance I shall place in the mouths of the gracefully dancing divine couple betel nuts to make them even more expert in dancing. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he mentions a similar desire in his book Sankalpa Kalpadruma. We've quoted that many times, Sankalpa Kalpadruma, in 2 verses, in verse 9 and in verse 35. Here in verse 9, he's addressing Srimati Radharani. I will string garlands and so forth. I will clean necklaces and belts and other ornaments and make various brushes with which to paint makara signs and other pictures on your transcendental body. I will prepare an ointment of mixture of chandan, camphor, kumkum, aguru, and so forth, and along with the sakis, I will blissfully prepare betels with great skill by placing lime, cloves, and betel nuts in betel leaves. Then in verse 35, he writes, in the morning, you, along with Kundalata and your dear sakis, will proceed to Nanda Bhavan to cook breakfast for your beloved Shri Krishna at the request of Shri Yashoda. At that time, I will follow behind carrying a container of tambula, as well as a jeweled fan and other items. Hare Krishna. Betel leaf, betel nut. Regarding these devotees, who appear in the Nitya Lila eternal pastimes of Radha and Krishna as gopis in the spiritual world, Raghunath Das Goswami writes, by offering her, Sri Radha, betel nuts, by massaging her feet, by bringing her water, by arranging for her meetings with Lord Krishna, and by performing many other services, many gopi maidservants affectionately pleased Sri Radha, the great queen of Vrindavan forest. When the divine couple enjoy their pastimes, these maidservants are not at all shy to serve, even when the Astasakis are. I take shelter of these maidservants who have Rupa Manjari as their leader. So, such devotees as Raghunath Das Goswami, Rupa Goswami, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur are qualified to speak in these ways, on these deep pastimes, because in their eternally liberated forms as gopis in the spiritual world, they participate in Radha and Krishna's pastimes. Take, for example, 13-year-old Kasturi Manjari, whose complexion is described as the color of gold, and who dresses in clothes the color of white crystal. She blissfully resides in a part of Rangadevi's grove called Kastur Yanan Dada Kunja. Kastur Yanan Dada Kunja. And in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, 500 years ago, she appears as Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the Lord's poetic biographer, you could say, and who writes of Krishna's eightfold daily pastimes. He resided on the bank of Shaimakund and composed a number of books in which he describes the service of offering betel to the divine couple. In one of his writings, he wrote, quote, in the morning, Lalita sent a garland and betel leaves with Tulsi and Kasturi, saying, give this to Sri Hari. In the evening, Radha sent Tulsi and Kasturi with a basket of full food for Yashoda. So how can Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami write about these things? Because not only does he envision them, but he's part of those pastimes as a gopi in the spiritual world. So therein we hear of the importance of betel leaf in Krishna's pastimes. Now apparently, different forms of the Lord, such as every devotee's favorite, Govardhan Hill, also relish betel leaf. It's described in Shastra, we've discussed this many times, that when Krishna appeared as a gigantic deity on top of Govardhan Hill to receive the offerings of the Brajavasis to Giriraj during Govardhan Puja, he kept asking for more and more foodstuffs. There's that famous quote, Aniyor, 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 give me more. But at one point the Brajabasis had no foodstuffs left to cook and offer. So out of fear of offending this gigantic deity, they looked to Balaram for help. So Lord Balaram, famously offered a tulsi leaf to the giant deity, who was finally satisfied. It's described that when this deity had finished eating everything, Krishna, this deity of Govardhan, rinsed his mouth with water from a nearby lake, then spit it out behind him, causing a lush field to magically appear. Finally, he picked his teeth with bamboo canes and sweetened his mouth and aided his digestion by chewing a few cartloads of betel nuts. Betel nuts, it's described. He sweetened his mouth and aided his digestion by chewing a few cartloads of betel nuts. It's described his beautiful face was glowing with great satisfaction. So betel nuts. Giriraj likes betel nuts. Now there's a nice poem I came across by a Brajabasi poet, Paramananda Das, in which he alludes to the fact that betel leaves not only serve to enhance Radha and Krishna's loving moods, but, like we just heard, they also aid in their digestion. He writes, it's interesting, O Krishna, remover of all sorrow, I have prepared this fragrant digestive leaf of betel with all the taste that you prefer. Please grant me the grace to never leave your side. Without you, Lord, what will I do? May our love never be interrupted. May our love never be interrupted. I was thinking when I read that one time Srila Prabhupada said that we're aspiring devotees, so he said we may not be able to know exactly how to pray to the Lord, but we can learn and memorize the prayers of great devotees and offer those prayers to the Lord. They'll certainly be accepted. So I was thinking that's one prayer we can offer to the Lord. Without you, Lord, what will I do? May our love never be interrupted. Hare Krishna. So in my research I came across many instances where betel leaf and betel nuts play an essential or important part in Lilas of Radha and Krishna. Actually, too many to count or remember even. But one example is that Vrinda Devi assigns forest goddesses and maidservants to maintain Radhakund and to provide, amongst other things, the fruits and flowers needed for the service of Radha and Krishna. It's described that for this service, many groves, flower gardens, and sub-forests are always well stocked with countless items, such as sweetly smelling incense for the day pastimes and softly burning lamps for the evening or night pastimes. It's also mentioned that around Radhakund there are actually tables and countertops with glasses of pure water and honey wine, I was reading, honey wine, as well as large containers of betel leaves and spices. We can't see them when we do Radhakund Parikrama, but in your mind's eye, just see large containers of betel leaves and spices on tables and countertops around Radhakund, because they're such an integral part of Krishna's pastimes. Now just how those betel leaves are used is described by our Goswamis. That, for example, during the famous swing pastimes at Radhakund, as Sri Radha is being swung by her closest associates, the tempo of the swinging sometimes gets really strong, and they're pushing really hard, Sri Radha on the swing. So she calls out for help at some point from her 8 girlfriends. And as they climb onto the swing, it instantly unfolds into a whirl of, like a lotus flower, a whirl of 8 seats for all the Astasakis to sit on, her closest associates. And while swinging, these gopi girls, they render many services. Champaklata and Chitra fan Shrimati Radharani, Tunga Vidya and Indulekha, they serve nectar drinks. Rangadevi and Sudevi, they apply fragrant ointments. And finally, Lalita and Vishaka serve Radharani Betel. Betel. Hare Krishna. So, we'll finish here today. We actually have enough material for another lecture on betel leaves and betel nut next Friday, but we'll finish here today. Let's finish with some quotes to begin with from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lila 16, 131. Actually, Lord Chaitanya is speaking. This is, again, all about betel leaves. He says, Se palera eka lava, napaya devata shaba, e dambe keba patiyaya, bahu janma punyakare tabe sukriti namadhare, se sukte tara lavapaya. Even after much prayer, the demigods themselves cannot obtain even a small portion of the remnants of Krishna Prasadam. Just imagine the pride of those remnants. Only a person who has acted piously for many, many births and has thus become a devotee can obtain remnants of such food. Wow, we're so fortunate. Then in Antya 16:133, Mahaprabhu refers now to betel leaf prasadam. He says, Krishna ye kaya tambula, kahi tara nahi mula, tahi arda dhamba paripati, tara yeba udghara, tare kaya amrita shara, gopira mukha kare alabhati. This is very important. The betel chewed by Krishna is priceless, and the remnants of such chewed betel are said to be the essence of all nectar. When the gopis accept these remnants, their mouths become his spittoons. Hare Krishna. Now, why I'm sharing these verses is it's very important to note that this final statement of Mahaprabhu is meant only for the residents of the spiritual world, to enjoy the betel enjoyed by the Lord. For the betel leaf there in the spiritual world, or in the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, is of a different quality than the betel leaf or betel nuts here. As we mentioned earlier, the betel leaf or nut here acts to increase the loving sentiments of Radha and Krishna. It's a transcendental item. So again, when they take that betel, they become intoxicated with rasa, or with love. Whereas the betel leaf here, or the betel nut here, it's actually an intoxicant to be avoided by all devotees of the Lord. In order to teach us this lesson, Lord Chaitanya performed the following pastime described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila 15, verse 16. Edina Naivedya Tambula Kaya Bhumite Padila Prabhu Achitana Hana. One day, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ate betel nuts offered to the deity, but they acted as an intoxicant, and he fell down on the ground unconscious. Now, in his commentary to this verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, betel nuts are an intoxicant, and therefore the regulative principles prohibit eating them. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastime of fainting after eating betel nuts is a solid instruction to all of us that one should not touch betel nuts, even those offered to Vishnu, he writes, just as one should not touch grains on the Ekadasi day. Of course, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's fainting had a particular purpose. As the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can do whatever he likes and eat whatever he wants, but we should not imitate his pastimes. So I'm sharing this because, well, you know, we've heard so much about the nectar of betel nuts and betel leaf, but they're not meant for us. They're meant for Krishna, for our deities. Also, in Vrindavan Das Thakur's Chaitanya Bhagavat, Madhya Khanda, verse 103, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he comments as follows. If on seeing the Lord's acceptance of intoxicants like betel nuts during his abhishek, befitting the King of Kings, one tries to imitate him, then one's inauspiciousness is assured. The proper etiquette approved by the Mahajans is to touch the remnants of betel nuts simply to one's head. If one accepts betel nuts on the pretext of accepting prasad, then his propensity for material enjoyment will certainly increase. Rather than becoming prakriti sahajas, the pure Vaishnavas cleverly avoid agitating their bodies with these items, betel nuts and betel leaves. So in this world, we should be happy practicing offering betel nuts and betel leaves to Radha and Krishna, who accept them as a transcendental commodity, you could say, with the hope that one day we may be so fortunate to be trained in offering them to Radha and Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati concludes in that way with this verse, the final verse today. When, her limbs clothed in silken garments, splendid like a new lotus whirl, and the hairs of her body enlivened, having again and again happily tasted the betel nuts, chewed by the Lord of her life, Shri Krishna, will my dear friend teach me the arts of singing and playing musical instruments. Hare Krishna. So that's all for today, Prabhus. Actually, when I had this idea to do a lecture on betel nuts, I thought, well, maybe I won't be able to do it because there's not enough information. Although I'd come across, references, I thought maybe let's see if it works. But here we go. We have one full lecture by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and our glorious previous acharyas, and we even have more information and nectar about this subject matter. So I'll see you next Friday for part 2 in betel leaves and betel nuts and Radha and Krishna's glorious Vrindavan pastimes. Thank you so much. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Bhimanandi, Jai Jai Sri Sri Radhe Shyam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, the revealer of the Dham. Hare Krishna.